Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are finally going over the results of my themed Letterboxd series video for the month of November, which was BIOPICS. Now, if you're new to this series, there's basically two parts to each month. There's a video that we post at the beginning of the month, or as close to the beginning of the month as I can, where we announce what the theme is, and then there's this video, which is the results video, where we go over everything. And again, if you're new to the series, this video is going to be in a playlist with all of the other episodes in this series, so you can go back and watch any of those. But the quick rundown is basically just every single month we've picked a different, whether it's a theme, a category, a genre, whatever it is, we pick that, and then at the beginning, the preview, the setup video, I go ahead and I just name what my current Letterboxd for is, and then mention a bunch of films that I'm going to watch that month. And then at the end of the month, which is what this video is, we're just going to go over everything that I watched, talk about what came in the Letterboxd for, what left the Letterboxd for, and what just kind of was something that fit in the category, but maybe I liked it, but I just didn't quite love it to that degree. But before we get into all of that, let me just remind you of the rules and the exclusions. So the rules for this is it just had to be a biopic. It was very loose. Initially, I was going to make it that it was like a musician biopic, but I ultimately kind of laid off on that, and it just, as long as it fits in the biographical genre, that was good enough for me. And for the exclusions, were a handful of exclusions, films that weren't eligible in the Letterboxd for, and this is something that if you're new to this series, that something to take note of, is once I put a film in a Letterboxd for from a previous month, it's ineligible going forward, because there's just certain films, there's a couple films I can think of that are like my favorite films of all time that would have been eligible in like 4 or 5 different categories to this point, and so I don't want to just keep like talking about the same film over and over again. I want there to be 48 films at the end of the year. I want it to be a whole bunch of different films that we've talked about. So if it is a film that has already been included in a Letterboxd for results video are excluded, and here are those. I believe it was 5 this month, which is by far the most of any month, but those 5 films that were excluded were BlacKkKlansman and Judas and the Black Messiah, because they were in the Black History Month episode, and I, Tonya, The Iron Claw, and Moneyball, because they were all in the sports episode. And without further ado, let's go over all of the films that I watched this month. Springsteen, Deliver Me From Nowhere. A film that will likely work better for you if you're a fan of The Boss, as evidenced by my packed theater of 50-year-old dads. While it didn't completely win me over in the end, it was a serviceable biopic. 42. Anytime I get to watch Chadwick Boseman perform is a good day, and this is one of my favorite roles of his. For a real-life story that is as disheartening as this, the moments where humanity shines make me emotional every time. A Complete Unknown. I went into this last year knowing next to nothing about Bob Dylan, but I left with several songs added to my playlist. Timothy Chalamet, Monica Barbaro, and Elle Fanning all deliver phenomenal performances. The Wolf of Wall Street. I think this is a film that I like more and more with each additional rewatch. I don't know where it would rank on a Scorsese ranked list, but each watch it moves up, because I come away more blown away by a different actor's performance each time. Lawrence of Arabia. When I finished the film, I had decided that this just wasn't for me, but afterwards, I watched some videos of Martin Scorsese and others talking about the film, and suddenly I'm actually really excited to give it another watch. Catch Me If You Can. This is my first time seeing this in a long time, and while it wasn't as rip-roaring as I remember, the performances from DiCaprio and Hanks are excellent. Every time I watch a Spielberg film, I come away thinking it's better than I remember, so one of these days I need to do a Spielberg ranked video. Straight Outta Compton. More so than some other biopics, this film really makes you feel like you've just been dropped off in the moment. There are so many important roles in the story, and the casting director knocked each one of them out of the park. King Richard. First time watching this since its Oscar season, and while Will Smith still wouldn't have been my pick in the actor category, he does deliver a strong performance. I understand this is the story the sisters wanted to be told, but I wish it was more focused on Venus and Serena's rise as players. Air. With the main celebrity of the story in the background, this product biopic focuses on the real people who brought to life something as iconic as the Jordan brand at Nike. Alex Convery's script sets up the film, and Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, Jason Bateman, and Viola Davis all bring it home with their performances. Bohemian Rhapsody. This is my first time watching this since its Oscar season, and it wasn't as bad as I remember. There are some awkward moments and some off-acting here and there, but there are several powerful moments. The whole Live Aid scene is a blast. Bombshell. I saw this in theaters years ago, but couldn't really remember much besides all 3 of Charlize Theron, Nicole Kidman, and Margot Robbie being great. After this rewatch, I'll remember the sharp screenplay, even if the film around it didn't come together all the way. Priscilla. I haven't seen the majority of Sofia Coppola's films, but this one is as stylish as the few I've seen. Jacob Elordi gives my favorite Elvis performance from the past couple years, and Kaylee Spaney is remarkable. The Elephant Man. The only thing I knew about this was the title, and that the main character was disfigured, so in my head I thought this might be a horror film, which puts me right alongside everyone judging him in the film. It was a beautiful film with excellent performances from Sir Anthony Hopkins and John Hurt. Blue Moon. As a big fan of Richard Linklater, this was one of my most anticipated of the year just to see his next directorial effort. While the film isn't going to blow you away from an entertainment standpoint, the way Ethan Hawke controls the film and performs the dialogue will blow you away. Roofman. I didn't watch many trailers for this film, but from what I had seen, I thought this would be a wall-to-wall comedy. While there are plenty of funny moments, it's the dramatic moments from Channing Tatum and Kirsten Dunst that make the film great. Blackberry. When I first saw this in theaters a few years ago, it was before I had watched It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, so I have been itching for a rewatch now that I have seen it. Glenn Howerton is fantastic, and this just might be my favorite product biopic. The Big Short. I knew the general idea of what the story was, but was completely wrong with how the story would be told. I assumed this would be a main characters yelling in the same conference room style of movie, but was pleasantly surprised with the fun way the story was told. The Smashing Machine. I was very excited to see this when it was first announced, but somehow this felt like a flat biopic, and not directed by a Safdie brother. Dwayne Johnson does have a couple moments where he shines, but at the end of the day, it's not a film that's going to be all that memorable for me. Amadeus. I was captivated for the entire 3-hour runtime, and was mesmerized with F. Murray Abraham and Tom Hulce's performances. With the story being a fictional story about real people, I wasn't sure exactly where it stands on it being a biopic or not, but I'm glad I watched it. Erin Brockovich. I knew next to nothing about this film, other than Julia Roberts being the star. I wasn't prepared for her character's journey in the film, and I wasn't prepared for how emotional I would be at the end. Nouvelle Vague. The film got off to a bit of a slow start for me, but once Zoe Deutsch's Jean Seberg is introduced in the film, it gets a boost of life. She is fantastic, and Guillaume Marbek is a standout as the often frustrating Jean-Luc Godard. Now again, like I said at the beginning of the video, in the preview video there's an original Letterboxd 4, so I've already talked about 4 films kind of in that video. I will say that there is a new entry into the Letterboxd 4 this month, which means a film had to leave, so let's talk about that film. Goodfellas. This was a hard film to leave out of the Letterboxd 4, because I enjoyed it just as much as I remember the first time. This is Martin Scorsese in top form, and is in the discussion for his best mob picture. At the end of the day, I don't know if I'll ever view this as one of my personal favorites, so that's why another film took its spot. And without further ado, let's take a look at the final Letterboxd 4. The Big Sick. Pakistan-born comedian Kumail Nanjiani and grad student Emily Gardner fall in love but struggle as their cultures clash. When Emily contracts a mysterious illness, Kumail finds himself forced to face her feisty parents, his family's expectations, and his true feelings. The film was nominated for Best Original Screenplay at the 2018 Academy Awards. The Big Sick was released in 2017 and was directed by Michael Showalter. The film stars Kumail Nanjiani, Zoe Kazan, and Holly Hunter. And immediately, here's the film that took over in the Letterboxd for the new entry. And this was kind of a really interesting experience for me, because I saw The Big Sick years ago. It had to have been probably within the year that it came out. Because there used to be this thing, I don't know if you guys remember, a thing called Redbox. And I used to absolutely just... that was where I watched my movies for the most part. This was like before I was like really big into just seeing everything in the theater. There was so much that I just waited for Redbox. And then there was things like this. Like, I don't even know if I remember seeing the trailer for it. No, I do remember the trailer. 'Cause when I was watching it, there was a couple moments in the movie that I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that from the trailer. So I guess I had seen it, so I probably was anticipating it. But I didn't know it was going to be as good as it was, or it was going to be a movie that I just truly loved. But so I did wait for it. I watched it on Redbox, and I specifically remember that because it was this movie, and I can't remember the other movie. Rough Night? Is that what it's called? I think it's the one with Scarlett Johansson. But I remember renting, those were the 2 movies I rented, and both of them had supporting performances from Bo Burnham, which I thought was just completely random and weird. I didn't know he was in either, but I was a massive fan of Bo Burnham, so I just remember that memory of watching those two movies kind of back to back. I think I watched the other one first, and then I watched The Big Sick, was the second one I watched that night when I rented it, and I instantly loved it. I remember being so emotional. I remember being so caught up in the film, like knowing that it was a true story was just very emotional for me, and I remember just thoroughly loving the film. But again, that would have been in 2017, and I haven't seen it since. So we're pushing 8 years, almost 9 years since the last time that I'd seen this film probably, and it's interesting because I remember loving this so much, and so when I first downloaded Letterboxd, I know there was a lot of people that kind of are iffy on whether they do this or not. If they add films that they've seen before they downloaded Letterboxd, or if they just do what I ended up doing, which is just dump everything you've ever seen and rate it, and as soon as you first download it. And I remember getting to the Big Sick that day that I was putting everything in there, and I'm like, 5-star movie. I put it as a 5-star, didn't even hesitate, and I've left it as a 5-star movie on Letterboxd throughout the years. But there's so many times where I'm looking at my own movies when I'm doing these kind of lists, or just scrolling down and just kind of seeing, and I'll see the Big Sick pops up with a 5-star rating, and I always kind of thought, like, was it really a 5-star? Did I really love it that much? And so it's like over like the past, I don't know, like couple years, I kept thinking, like, I need to lower that, I need to lower it on Letterboxd, but I just never did. I always just kind of left it as a 5-star movie. And so this is the first time watching it again in 7-8 years, and I remember just turning on the film and sitting there and being like, in my head, kind of thinking, is this as good as I remember? Is this going to be a 5-star film? And it's probably within the first like 15-20 minutes that I was like, yeah, this was a 5-star. I remember loving this so much, and I was loving it so much this time too. And the sole reason is for the beginning of the film, the first act or so, I guess, of the film, when you're seeing the romance between Kumail Nanjiani and Zoe Kazan, between Kumail and Emily, seeing their romance, seeing their chemistry, like it's just this like romance that you're kind of getting swept up in, and in their just the perfect little meet cute, like their perfect chemistry together, like everything is going great, and then it goes bad, like the relationship sours, and then tragedy strikes, and then all of a sudden you get two more acts of this film of something really tragic, something really horrible, something really scary happening for 2/3 of this movie, but your main character is a stand-up comedian, and so he's like he's just kind of naturally being funny and making jokes, but it's the type of jokes where you're like, oh, that's maybe not the right time to make this joke, and there's so many just different things that make him such a charming, and again, because it's a story just about their life, like he's portraying this very honestly. He's portraying this as, this is what we went through, this is specifically what I went through, this is what Emily's parents went through, this was what was happening at this time. Like everything kind of comes together in this very, again, super cute romantic first act, very devastating and emotional kind of second and third act of this film. And so it's a film that is just full of emotion, and I've said it so many times before, I think that's for me the benchmark of if I really love a film or not, is if you have multiple emotions, you make me feel multiple emotions, and you make me feel them at like a high intensity. Like I'm laughing really hard, and then I'm crying by the end, and I'm crying just as hard as I was laughing. Some films have maybe a little bit of comedy, and they have a little bit of action or something, and maybe the comedy's kind of right here, and the action's great, but then it's kind of like, oh well, the comedy's kind of not there, or maybe it's a horror comedy where the scares are amazing, and then they kind of just put in these lame jokes, and it's like if they're not balanced, it doesn't really work for me. But this is a film where both elements are just dialed up, they work, and really, this was just a film that, again, I first watched, remember loving it. I've kind of been doubting myself for the last like 7 years on this, but now rewatching it, getting all the way through, being in tears, like this was the film out of everything I watched this month. This was the one that made me cry the most when I got to the end of it, and I kind of remembered how it ended, and I was still just so emotional by it. It really is a beautiful film. I love The Big Sick. Oppenheimer. The story of J. Robert Oppenheimer's role in the development of the atomic bomb during World War II. The film won 7 Oscars at the 2024 Academy Awards. Best Picture, Best Director for Christopher Nolan, Best Actor for Cillian Murphy, Best Supporting Actor for Robert Downey Jr., Best Cinematography, Best Film Editing, and Best Original Score. It was also nominated in 6 other categories: Best Supporting Actress for Emily Blunt, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Costume Design, Best Makeup and Hairstyling, Best Production Design, and Best Sound. Oppenheimer was released in 2023 and was directed by Christopher Nolan. The film stars Cillian Murphy, Emily Blunt, and Robert Downey Jr. Now, Oppenheimer probably is the most, like, no-brainer. Like, it was going to make this Letterboxd 4. Solely because, it was in the Best Picture category video at the beginning of the month in January is when I did that. And ultimately, I think it was, like, probably number 5. Maybe it was number 6, because I think I had... I'm drawing a blank on... No Country for Old Men, I think, missed. Yeah, I think I had No Country for Old Men maybe missed the final Letterboxd 4, and so I think Oppenheimer was like maybe it was either 5th or 6th, like between those two, what would have been the alternate to get in there for Best Picture, and somehow Oppenheimer just hasn't found itself in any of the other categories ever since, because some of the categories get very, very specific, and so it's a film that probably fits in so many different genres and so many different boxes. But this is the first time really since Best Picture winners in January that I've had an opportunity to talk about it in this series, and so it was almost just like a shoe, and it was the easiest when I was coming up with my final 4 here during my preview. I was like, okay, well, Oppenheimer has a spot, and that was the one that even this whole month after watching, I think it was like the first one that I rewatched this month, and it was just like there's no way I'm going to find 4 films better than Oppenheimer. It is a masterpiece from one of my favorite directors. I'll put a link in the description. I have a Christopher Nolan ranked video on my channel. I think this is now the 3rd, maybe the 4th different Christopher Nolan film to make it into one of these categories, make it into the one of the months. So yeah, it was very obvious, and if you've seen the film, even if you haven't seen the film, you don't need this little 5-6 minute segment here where I'm talking about the films to really sell you on Oppenheimer. It is phenomenal. I listed 13 different categories that it was nominated for at the Academy Awards. In hindsight, looking back at it, it's kind of crazy that it only won 7 of the 13. Like, when I was just reading some of the ones that it was nominated for that it didn't win, like screenplay, seems kind of crazy, like, looking back at it. Obviously, it was one of those things where there was other films that, that you wanted to... Academy probably wants to make sure everything gets a little bit of love here and there, but it's crazy that a film could get as many wins as it did and then not win that. Yeah, it's one of those that we could pick any of those 13 categories and just say, okay, let's talk about Cillian Murphy, and then I could go on a little rant about how amazing Cillian Murphy is and how he's a 3-hour runtime and he is on the screen for 80+% of it. Like, it is his story. It's very rarely cutting away from him, and even if it's cutting away from him, he's still the focal point of, like, the conversation that 2 other people might be having. Like, it's still all revolving around Oppenheimer. We could say, let's talk about the directing, and I can talk about Christopher Nolan for the next couple minutes and talk about the way that he was able to find this film. I believe it's been a couple years, so I'm a little rusty on the story, but I believe it's Robert Pattinson gave him the American Prometheus, is that the name of the book, when they were shooting Tenet, and he read it and instantly was like, I've got to make this, my next film. And the way that he was able to just completely commit wholeheartedly to this script, to this story, the way he was able to execute it, the creative directorial decisions that he makes between, shooting in I'm drawing a blank on like what they call it, but like factual or facts and like subjective, like in the reality and subjective or whatever. But it's like in color is when it's Cillian Murphy's kind of point of view, and if it's in black and white, it's Robert Downey Jr.'s character's kind of point of view. And so you're kind of you know that as this film is, the way it's edited, the way it's cut up into different, kind of jumping around from certain timeline to different timeline, to sometimes within one timeline you're kind of going to a flashback. And it's one of those that when if you're not paying super close attention, it could be kind of lose you a little bit. But the way he's able to direct it, the way he's able to stylize it, it's just does an excellent job. I could look at, so let's talk about the score, and I could spend a couple minutes talking about the score, especially the midpoint scene where Robert Downey Jr., which let's go ahead and lump him into this too. We're talking about how great Robert Downey Jr. is in the film. The midpoint scene where Robert Downey Jr. is pointing out that there's a mole or there's a rat that's leaking information to Russia, and he's talking about how there's a rat or a mole in Los Alamos, and kind of going over all that whole scene, the way that the music is swelling, the way that Robert Downey Jr. is getting so intense during that scene. Like, it's just amazing. Again, I could do this with just every single category, where I could pick a category and I could talk about it for 4 or 5 minutes. Oppenheimer, it is a masterpiece. It is one of the best picture winners. In that January episode, because it's my Letterboxd 4, I'm gonna pick some of my personal favorites, and put them in there. I think if you just did a general consensus and just polled, 1,000 random people, I wouldn't be shocked if Oppenheimer was in like the general audience's Letterboxd 4 for Best Picture winners, because it is such an amazing film. It was such a experience too when it came out. The whole Barbenheimer experience, like, there's just so much going on there with the film that led it to become this big success. But I think the biggest thing is just that it's a damn good movie, and so thoroughly love it. Again, like I said, I don't rank these. I just, when I do this section, I just rank them in alphabetical order. But if I ranked them in terms of like favorite to least favorite, like, this was in the number 1 spot. Like, again, this was the most safe in this category. It always had a spot here. Rocketman. The story of Elton John's life, from his years as a prodigy at the Royal Academy of Music through his influential and enduring musical partnership with Bernie Taupin. The film won for Best Original Song at the 2020 Academy Awards. Rocketman was released in 2019 and was directed by Dexter Fletcher. The film stars Taron Egerton, Jamie Bell, and Richard Madden. Now, we talked about Rocketman a couple months ago in, I believe it was the Pride Month videos when I first watched it, and ultimately didn't crack that Letterboxd 4 because I kind of went in a different direction where I didn't necessarily just want, like, this is just a story about a gay man and about his life, and so it definitely fit in that category, but I ultimately kind of just went in a different direction of, like, where the themes of it were more so just really focused on LGBTQ, like, themes more so than just kind of about the life of someone who happens to be in the LGBTQ community. So it ultimately didn't make the list there, but I was also kind of willing to kind of bump it there because I knew biopics was coming up. And as far as musician biopics go, clearly this is my favorite. It's the only actual, musician biopic that is going to be in this 4. And so when I originally had the idea, I thought of doing this as just musician biopics, and that was at how strong Oppenheimer ended up being when it's all biopics. That's how strong Rocketman would have been if it was just musician biopics. I thoroughly love this. I'm not the biggest fan of like musician biopics in general, but this one specifically just works for me on so many levels. I love the narrative, like the way that the story's told, the way that it starts off with, I was going to say present day, but not present day to us, but like present day in the story, like where the story's taking place, where you have him kind of walking into the AA meeting and talking with all the people, and then the way that it uses his songs as kind of ways to trigger certain flashbacks, or because it starts off with The Bitch Is Back is like the first song that's just kind of this like dance number that's introducing like young Elton John, and then it kind of has Reginald. That's what I was trying to think of what his name, young Reggie, and then it, like, the Saturday Night, It's All Right for Fighting, is just an excellent song choice to use as kind of the transition from when he's kind of going from the young man to Taron Egerton taking over as Elton John, like kind of that transition there. It's just an excellent use of that song as like the transition scene, and then it uses the use of when it uses Rocketman as he's, I can't remember exactly what his line is, but for my next trick I'm going to kill myself, I think is what he says. He jumps in the pool, using that as kind of, and using it as like a slowed down version that makes it a little bit more emotional. Like the use of the songs in this is just blew me away when I saw it in theaters, and I think that is something that I can compare it to other certain biopics where they tell the story of a celebrity or a musician from birth to death, and or maybe it doesn't quite go birth to death, but maybe it just goes from like the formation of the band to the end. Usually they go to death for musician biopics if a artist has passed, and they kind of just are like, okay, so here's the beginning of the band, here's where we wrote this song, here's where we wrote this song, then we wrote this song, then we did, and so it's like when the songs play in the movie, it's just kind of like okay, you move to this song, you move to that song, and it just kind of becomes this thing that's like not that inspired, and it's just like, okay, now we're just listening to said artist's discography, and it's kind of tying the story together. But for the most part, we're just kind of taking breaks here and there to listen to 2-3 minute segments of a certain song, and then we move on to the next thing. But again, just the way it's used in Rocketman, where the songs are part of the story, and it's um, just like I think the when I think it's Benny and the Jets. I'm drawing a blank. I think it's Benny and the Jets is like the one that he's playing where he kind of starts floating, like the when he's playing the piano in like the sparkly outfit in like the club, and then everyone's kind of starts levitating. Like there's just so many different the way that it uses the songs all throughout. It's just inspired, and so I truly just kind of love it for that reason. I think another thing that's also worth pointing out, and a big thing and a big reason that maybe I'm a little biased to this, and I've always kind of felt that maybe this is the case. It just so happens that I'm a massive Elton John fan. Like, I just love Elton John. Was a little bit familiar with his music going into this. I'm as big as where I am now, where I've listened to the majority of his discography and have listened multiple albums where it's just like the entire album is like added to playlists and stuff. It's I became a bigger fan from this movie, but I already went into it a pretty big enough fan. And so there are a couple other musician biopics, like I just talked about it in earlier when I was going through everything. I watched the Springsteen biopic and Bob Dylan. I went into those not really knowing anything, a complete unknown. I went into those not really knowing anything about the artists, and those can have varying degrees. Like, I really love A Complete Unknown, and the Bruce Springsteen Deliver Me From Nowhere is okay. I went in like being like, okay, I would come out of it being like, okay, I like this artist a little bit more than when I went into it. But it doesn't completely win me over to the point that it's like I am going to go on a month straight where I listen to nothing but this artist. And that's what this film did, where I went on months on end where it was just like all I was listening to was Elton John, because I just already loved him, and then the biopic was just such an excellent film that made me just kind of fall in love even more with the musician. So that is part of it. As I admit that with Rocketman, maybe this is higher for me than it is for a lot of other people, and I'm willing to admit that there could be a little bit of a bias there because of how much I do enjoy his music. But at the end of the day, it's just excellent performances from Taron Egerton all throughout. It's just everyone is giving just these emotional and like powerful scenes. It's one of those where Taron Egerton's kind of obviously he's not really in it for the first 30ish minutes, but once he is introduced, once Elton grows up a little bit and he becomes our stand-in for Elton John, the rest of the way he has these one-on-one scenes with so many different characters, and there's so many different emotions, and a lot of it it's dramatic, it's raw, like human, like emotions. Like I think of the phone call that he has with his mom, who's Bryce Dallas Howard, is excellent. When he comes out and says that he's gay, and she's kind of like, well, we knew that, but then she kind of says like, you just know that you're never truly going to be loved. Like these scenes that are like almost feel like it's this warm hug, and then all of a sudden it gets really like cold, and someone says something that's just like, oh, and everyone just is delivering these lines and these performances all throughout the film that are just excellent. I could go on all day about how much I love Rocketman, and it's another one of those that I think it's just every single time I watch it, I come away liking it more and more. I think on first watch I maybe gave it like a 4-star on Letterboxd, and now I'm all the way up to it being a 5-star movie because it is my favorite musician biopic. Social Network. In 2003, Harvard undergrad and computer programmer Mark Zuckerberg begins work on a new concept that eventually turns into the global social network known as Facebook. 6 years later, Mark is one of the youngest billionaires ever, but his unprecedented success leads to both personal and legal complications when he ends up on the receiving end of 2 lawsuits, one involving his former friend. The film won 3 Oscars at the 2011 Academy Awards: Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Film Editing, and Best Original Score. The film was also nominated for Best Picture, Best Director for David Fincher, Best Actor for Jesse Eisenberg, Best Cinematography, and Best Sound Mixing. The Social Network was released in 2010 and was directed by David Fincher. The film stars Jesse Eisenberg, Andrew Garfield, and Justin Timberlake. Now, I think The Social Network is a film in here that maybe seemed kind of obvious probably for a lot of other people. Like if you yourself saw this video and you thought to yourself beforehand, like, what would be in my Letterboxd for biopics? I think The Social Network is in there for the majority of people because I know this is such a universally loved film. And I knew it was such a universally loved film for the decade, maybe like dozen years, 12 years or so after it came out, before I finally saw it for the first time, because I heard nothing about people raving about it and talking about how much they loved the film. And this is just, again, if you're new to this whole channel, the name of the channel is The World's Worst Cinephile, and the whole point of that being is, like, I watch so many movies, but not like the important movies. For a long time I would just watch whatever kind of dumb movie, and so people would mistake me as a cinephile, but then I'd be like, oh, but I haven't seen The Social Network, and I point out a film that's like, you can't be a cinephile if you haven't seen, X, Y, and Z, if you haven't seen these super, like, big films, and The Social Network was one for me for the longest time that was a big blind spot. And I think ultimately so maybe I did see it in like maybe it was 2021, because I remember at 2020, everyone posting like their best of the decade lists, and that being such a big trend, and everyone's posting their top 25 films or so, or whatever, the decade, and The Social Network was like the number one film on so many people's list. And I've got a buddy that I think it was his number one. I can't remember for sure if it was like his number one, but it was high up there, one of his all-time favorite films, and absolutely one of the best of the decade for him. And so I'd always had kind of known that I was like, I'm going to see this. I've got to see it at some point. So I think it was maybe like 21, 22, somewhere in that range where I finally, sat down and watched it for the first time. And I think, I think I maybe watched this after the Trial of the Chicago 7 came out, if I'm not mistaken. Because I think I watched that, and then I saw so many people talking about, like, Sorkin's dialogue and talking about how he's better when he's not in the director's seat, and it's just his dialogue, and someone else is directing his dialogue, and so many people were just talking about The Social Network. And so I think maybe that's when I watched it for the first time, to just experience that. And again, I had already kind of experienced his dialogue style a little bit in the Trial of the Chicago 7, and then going into The Social Network and just being like, whoa, this is a different animal. This is completely different. And I think a big part of that is having Jesse Eisenberg being the one that's delivering that dialogue. Like Andrew Garfield, he can have these moments, and Justin Timberlake and Armie Hammer and like other characters that, like, they'll deliver some of these lines, and it's like, okay, it's a little quick, it's a little snappy, and it's Sorkin, but the way Jesse Eisenberg is delivering this dialogue is to the point that I'm like, I know the real Mark Zuckerberg wasn't talking like this. I've heard the way he talks. I know this isn't the most accurate in that sense, but it's for the dramatization of this story and for this movie. Having Jesse Eisenberg with kind of the smug attitude that he brings to the character, delivering these lines, is just so captivating. And again, so I think this is the second time period that I've seen this film. And the thing that on this second watch that kind of caught me off guard, that I wasn't as prepared for, I didn't remember the score being as like amazing. Like, the score is intense in this film, in terms of, looking at all of the different biopics that I've watched this month. Again, because once you get like the musician biopics, it's mostly just their music, and maybe there's a little bit of a score, but it's like renditions of their songs or something. There's not a lot of biopics that have like a score the way that this does. I guess Oppenheimer. I did just talk about that a couple seconds ago, but this is like right up there with Oppenheimer's score. Like, it was phenomenal. I was like blown away the entire time rewatching this, just being like, I did not remember the score being such an impactful part of this. But The Social Network, really, the highlight, it really does just come down to Jesse Eisenberg's performance, as well as Aaron Sorkin's dialogue, David Fincher's direction. Those are kind of like the big three that really is bringing this together, and it's something that just makes it so captivating, to the point that, we're talking about Jesse Eisenberg's performance. His performance is so good in a way that, like, even the people he's interacting with, just if Jesse Eisenberg is in the scene, whoever he's interacting with, it makes their performance all that much better. I'm thinking about just kind of like the subtle moments kind of toward the end of the film with like Rashida Jones's character talking to him, and what's her line of, "You're not an asshole, you're just trying really hard to be one," and things like that, where she just has some of these characters just have these dialogue and these moments talking to Jesse Eisenberg's Mark Zuckerberg, and just because he's in the scene, the way that the lines get delivered and the way that he either responds, whether it's verbally or just kind of like with a face or a snide remark, like the things like that, like he's elevating everything with him in the film. And the biggest thing that for me that is just insane looking back at this is because this is obviously I didn't see this for 12 plus years or so probably after it came out, but this was also 10 years before I got into the Oscars. And so when I first was getting into the Oscars, I would hear about the snub, like everything that Social Network got snubbed for in terms of wins, and honestly, in terms of nominations, it should have had more nominations than it had here. But looking like now, having seen it and looking back and like being like, how does it not win Best Picture? How does Eisenberg not win? Win for actor? I don't know who else was nominated, but how does Fincher not win for director? Like, there's so many things. How does Andrew Garfield not get nominated for supporting actor? Like, I'd have to go look at what the supporting actor lineup was that year, because again, there's some parts of Garfield's performance that isn't necessarily like the best or the strongest or whatever, but he has like 4 or 5 just like amazing moments, specifically the Prada slippers, or I can't remember exactly what the Gucci flip flops, is that what he says? That whole rant, and I'm coming back for everything. Like, that is such an like a Oscars like clip performance for when you get nominated. Like, it's crazy to think that he didn't even get nominated for this. But yeah, again, The Social Network is one of those films that I think for the majority of people, it's a no-brainer. It was going to be in the list, and it's the same for me. It was a no-brainer. It was always in my list. That's it. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know down below in the comments what you thought of these nominations, or these 4 picks that I had. Also, just let me know what your 4 would have been if you were doing your own personal Letterboxd 4 there for biopics. It's just always interesting to see the different things of where we differ, or what you consider. Obviously, film is subjective, so it could be a film that maybe, like the Bruce Springsteen biopic, I was a little more dismissive of that. Maybe you come in and you just love it. Same with Lawrence of Arabia. I was a little bit kind of dismissive on it after the first watch, but again, I was like watching videos and people talking about it, and some of the things I thought of as like negatives, all of a sudden someone's like, Scorsese's talking about it as a positive, and I'm like, whoa, like maybe I need to rewatch this and see if that changes my opinion. But I'm just interested to see those lists down below. And then also just a heads up for the schedule in the next day or two after getting this uploaded. I've already been watching the December films, and I'm going to get that category video uploaded in the next day or two as well. So make sure you're subscribed for that. And if you'd like to like this video and then subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that video or any of the other different series that I have going on my channel, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.